Welcome back, everyone. My name is John Euler. This is Journey to Healing. We are doing a deep dive into the topic of boundaries, and more specifically, we are continuing to look at God's greatest gift that He has given to those that are being oppressed. If I were to ask you what that is, would you know? If you've been with us, you would know, and it has to do with imprecatory prayers. What are those, and what are the power of them? What's the power behind those? We will look at that next on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? John Euler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. John has more than 30 years of professional experience, helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There really is hope. There is a God who loves you, who wants to help you find peace and strength. And John Euler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is John Euler. This is Journey to Healing. We're here every Friday night on TECN.TV, the leader in Internet TV. We're here from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every week, and we do a deep dive into the most crucial of topics as far as those issues that will prevent someone from moving forward in his or her life. I've done therapy for 30 years, and I use this opportunity to give to the audience, those that view these videos, really what I believe are the key issues that will keep someone stuck and how to address those. So we've been doing that for a number of years here. If you would like to go back, and I highly recommend it, go to the site SurvivorSupport.net under the Insights tab. No, I'm sorry, under the Podcast tab. The Insights tab is excellent as well, by the way. Under the Podcast tab, and you will see an ever-growing repository of these programs. And this series that we're doing in particular, you will see that up at the top. This is, we're into the 20s as far as the number of programs we've been doing. So there are hours and hours of this topic because it is so crucial to understand the topic of forgiveness. That is what we are dealing with. Forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. This is, in my estimation, the second most important of all issues to get right. The first being how to be made right with God. The second, what is the nature of forgiveness, and does one have to forgive everybody no matter what? Because that is a belief out there that is wrong, in my estimation. It is a flat out false belief. It sounds nice. It has gotten into all areas of church or churches and counseling, but it is one of the most dangerous of all beliefs. If you tell someone, if you believe that you have to forgive no matter what. As I've mentioned before, one of my favorite pastors has a book on forgiveness, and the advertisement, as where he's giving it away for free, talks about how we need to be like God because God has forgiven us lavishly, or God forgives lavishly. And I would say that's a warped view in this sense. God does not forgive lavishly, He forgives graciously, but He doesn't forgive lavishly. Why? He forgives conditionally. How can I say that? Well, again, go back, start at program number 1, but in brief, we forgive as God forgives. We are commanded to forgive. So when is that applicable? Exactly as God forgives and when He forgives. When does He forgive? It's 1 John 1:9 in the New Testament. If we confess, that is our responsibility. This is a conditional verse in the original and also in English. If we confess our sins, then He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. We are not forgiven unless we confess. People who end up going to hell have no one to blame but themselves, meaning if you don't go to heaven, you go to hell, right? And if you don't go to heaven, you don't have anybody to blame but yourself. And what prevents somebody from going to heaven? What will send somebody to hell? Their pride, their lack of willingness, so their unwillingness to forgive. So, I'm sorry, to confess. Let me get this right, right? Well, and then they aren't forgiving, by the way. So it is one and the same, but their lack of willingness to confess, that is what is required in order to be saved, to be forgiven, to be born again, to have a relationship with God. If you have not confessed, then you have no relationship with God. Why? Because your pride stands in front of and between you and God. So we forgive exactly as God forgives. So God forgives when there's confession. He never forgives prior to confession. And if you are having a difficult time with that, it is your issue. Okay, right? It's our issue. If I don't like that, then the question is who has the issue? So, you know, this is so important because we're dealing with the issue of how to set people free. How can I be set free? How can we set others free? How can we maintain boundaries? Well, if you don't have the issue of forgiveness down correctly, then you are not going to be able to have boundaries, are you? Because somebody will come along and tell you that you shouldn't have boundaries, in essence. Oh, they may not say that exactly. What they'll say is this: well, you know what? Forget about it. Don't worry about what he's done. Just make nice. And suddenly what? You're supposed to be back together with that person. We've just finished or made it through the holidays. Some of you are breathing a sigh of relief. Some of you are licking your wounds. Why? Because you were around people you probably should not have been, because if you'd been listening to this program, you would know they were in the category of pigs, dogs, and fools. Jesus said, do not cast your pearls before swine, right? Because what will happen? They'll trample your pearls and they'll turn on you. That's Matthew chapter 7, verse 6. The question is, how did the holidays go? If you were around oppressive people, my guess is they just didn't suddenly become oppressive. So what happens? Somehow you went near people that you should not have been. Why did you do that? Well, if perfect love casts out all fear, I'll tell you what, you didn't do it out of love. Why? Because if you'd been given your druthers, or given your druthers, if you'd been given a choice, what would be the truth? You would not have been around them. And you could have listed off the reasons why. And so the question is, why were you around them? And look what happens afterward. Okay, those of you with eating issues, you probably gained some pounds. Why? Because you had to keep shoving the food in lest the truth come out. You had to keep your mouth full. Those with a drinking issue, what happened? You started drinking a lot. Why? Because you were trying to keep yourself under control. But half the time, what happens when you start drinking? The inhibitions drop and then all hell breaks loose, right? Out comes the stuff. So to give the incorrect information about the issue of forgiveness will affect the issue of boundaries. So we have to ensure that we get this right. Why? Because it is so crucial for our freedom and our relationship with God. God has given us his presence and his word to help guide us in this life. And as we have seen, his word, especially in the book of Psalms, the book of Psalms is the largest book in the entire Bible, 150 chapters. And nearly half the book of Psalms are imprecatory prayers. They are preserved for us to help us be able to understand how much God cares about us. And that's what we've been looking at, because that is God's greatest gift to a survivor, to an oppressed individual. And there are gradations of in ways that somebody can be negatively impacted, the most profound of which, and we've looked at some of the gradations, but the most profound way you can harm someone is what? Sexual perpetration. So again, just for review momentarily here, you see that up at the top, on a scale of 1 to 10, you see that vertical line. Those are the degrees of impact. So we are not talking about small stuff. We are talking about way up at the top. You see, in order to properly understand the book of Psalms, you have to have been impacted by somebody, by an oppressor. See that category? We looked at that in the past, the distinctions, and the word that Jesus used when we are to love our enemies is poneros, not sapros or kakos. Okay, so to understand the book of Psalms, you need to understand the degrees of oppression and the degrees of negative impact, and you see imprecatory prayers. Those are the ones that are really, we could add 8, 9s, and 10s. We could drop that as far as the majority of the book of Psalms, even down to a 7. So if you have not been deeply wounded by someone who is an oppressor, then you haven't got clue 1. And so you will give out platitudes. You will inevitably be inclined to place responsibility on the oppressed rather than the oppressor to make things right. And that is a key thing to really self-examine ourselves. When it comes to the issue of hurtfulness, those that have been emotionally irresponsible, those that have been um, willful and indifferent towards the harm that they have caused people. The question is this: when we find out that somebody has hurt another person, and we're not talking about faults, again, look at this chart. We're not talking about the 1s and 2s and 3s and even 4s. Okay, we are talking about significant, major impact that will change the course of somebody's life forever. If you haven't experienced that, count yourself fortunate, or ask yourself, who have you been around and have you pacified people? But still, they're changing the course of your life. But if you are either targeted by one of these individuals or stand up in order to be a peacemaker, which is to let the perpetrator or oppressor know that they are under judgment of God, they'd better get right. They'd better stop harming someone. That is a genuine peacemaker. We looked at the Beatitudes. Who were the people Jesus was addressing when he would say, "Blessed are the..." We looked at that. I recommend go back and look at the audience. It was really those being harmed, those being oppressed, and those who were protective. So we have to align ourselves with God's heart. Why? Because he intends for us to reflect his heart, especially when it comes to those who have been harmed. And imprecatory prayers, again, about half the book of Psalms, 46% of the book of Psalms, and that's conservative, are written for those who are being negatively impacted or have been negatively impacted in a significant way, in a meaningfully life-changing negative way. This is God's comfort and his encouragement to those who have been harmed. His heart is not for the perpetrator or the oppressor. He is against those individuals. We looked at in the past, again, briefly. Here are the categories under this line. As you see those broad white arrows. The tendency is downward. These are all the different categories in the book of Psalms and Proverbs. Look up above, and you will see how God feels about each category. And when you may ask, well, what categories? Well, we first of all have the actual, oh, sorry, there's me. Okay, I'm going to go back here. We have the broad biblical categories. Those are the first time we see those are in the book of Proverbs. As far as actually categorized, at the end of the book of Proverbs, you'll see 3 terms. These are categories of individuals, and they are very consistent in terms of how God feels about them. And the simple, and everybody is moving downhill because they are violating conscience. So when it comes to a fool, we need to understand a fool is under God's judgment. Why? Because a fool has decided, he has said in his heart, there is no God. And we've looked at the pig zone picture. This is another view, -1, -2, -3. You can see where the fool is compared to that. So if we bring up the pig zone chart, right, you look at -3, that's a toxic relationship based upon a real toxic individual. Over on the right, he has no knapsack. He's offloaded that. So if we do another version of this, look at the -3, and there you have it. So a fool, by the time somebody becomes a fool, it is no laughing matter. They are actually worse than the pig and the dog. They are somebody who is going to be uniquely hurtful. They are in the mocker category. And it is important, it is vital for us to make sure that we reflect an understanding of God's heart. And so the circles up in the top, that is how God feels about each of those categories. If we feel kindly about anybody, it should be in the green. If we have compassion, it should be for those in the green as far as if they're off the path. Now, our compassion should go to those being harmed. But as far as correction, okay, that's where the prodigal son would come in. Actually, the prodigal son was probably in the yellow there. Okay, he was right on the border of being simple and wayward. Actually, he was pretty wayward, but he had not been immoral. He was immoral, but he had not been unethical. He didn't even steal. He didn't even take food that wasn't his that were intended for the pigs. Okay, so that's why he was eligible to return. Paul said he was eligible for forgiveness because he did what he did out of ignorance. So when you see those categories,
I can understand
my heart should reflect
that God is very
God's
active.
heart. And if I
He
get
says,
that
vengeance
out of
is
whack,
mine. What does that mean?
what happens,
He has
see this all the
those
time in
bonds.
churches, is that you have people feeling sorry for those in the dark red. Oh my. Okay, hold on here. I just ended up, okay, my apologies. If you can stay with me, I'm going to back up just a little bit because I think I know, dang it. Okay. I think I clicked a video that I was going to be showing. Okay, so we will. Sorry about the technical issues here. I may not play that one. I'm going to play that in a few moments. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me go back to the point I was trying to make. Hopefully that wasn't too distracting, which was, there we go. So again, look at the circles. That is how God feels about the different people in those categories. You're only in any of those categories by choice. How do you get in those categories? And that is degrees of willfulness, degrees of ego, degrees of hurtfulness. And the further from left to right you go, the more purposeful and intentional. Think about in the legal system. You hear with those that have done great harm, one thing that will be assessed is the degree of intentionality. Did they do it with malice and forethought? So the further, I'm going to bring the chart back up, the further somebody goes from left to right, the more malice and forethought they have. But the smarter they are, you won't be able to see it. You'll know the pain, but you won't be able to pin them on it. Why? Because they go into politics and they look really polished, but meanwhile, they're doing great harm to people. Also in churches. Churches are filled with wolves. And there are many people that have been perpetrated against in a lot of different ways. Ripped off financially. Think about the wolves that are in the prosperity movement. Those that'll stand up and all they ever talk about is how to plant seeds of faith, which happens to be dollar bills. Those are frauds. You look at 2 Peter chapter 2. It's very clear. Our focus, a pastor's focus, is not to be on money. If you focus on money, and if you are a pastor focusing on money, then you need to tell me how you're different than 2 Peter chapter 2. Okay, you need to focus on money about as much as Jesus focused on money, which is not really very much. So unless you're a fraud, stop focusing on money. Okay, your people, you feed the sheep and they will then in turn respond. So you talk about money about as much as God talks about money, or the New Testament does, in that order, and you'll be okay. If you're in a church where they are constantly talking about money, get out of that church. Do not stick around in a carnal church at best. More than likely, you may be dealing with a non-Christian who is a wolf in sheep's clothing, who is a fraud. Okay, we have to have discernment. What's happened in churches is they have dumbed discernment down, and therefore, not only do you have financial predators, you have sexual predators. Again, 2 Peter chapter 2, but that's just dealing with adult predators. The pastor is helping himself to the cash, and the women. You have child predators in church, and they are perping on kids, and churches are dumb. They're ignorant at best, willfully blind at worst, or even worse, they're facilitating this. Most oftentimes, when sexual perpetration has happened in churches, the survivor, the victim will be told to keep their mouth shut. Oh, they won't be told exactly that. There'll be all sorts of phrases or terminologies, such as we have to, turn the other cheek. We have to make sure that we are placing all things behind us. We need to let the past be in the past. We need to let bygones be bygones. We need to bury the hatchet. We need to help welcome the prodigal home. Those are lies. And that is born out of the same teaching, or in those same churches, you will hear an emphasis on the victim or the survivor having the responsibility to forgive those that aren't repentant. And they'll never focus any attention on the perpetrator. So instead of running the guy out on the rails, or even better, what they have to do, pastors are mandated reporters, they need to call the police on the guy, on the perpetrator, on the youth pastor. How many perpetrators have harmed individuals who have gone to church? And now those people will never darken the door of church. Why? Because a millstone was placed around the neck of the victim rather than the perpetrator. The perpetrator is going to put a millstone. The word for millstone is scandalon. We get the word scandalize. The greatest way you can scandalize somebody for the rest of their life and having them stumble over primary issues of God's love and his faithfulness and his concern is to sexually perpetrate upon a kid and never show that kid that justice is brought to bear. And that is going on all the time in churches. And that must stop. And we are committed on this program to speaking truth and helping set captives free. And if you are not serious, if you go to a church and you are not committed to truth, and you are not committed to rooting out evil, David said in Psalm 101 that he would make it his daily practice to ferret out evil. Now, we're not going snooping. That's not our goal. But if something comes to your attention, especially if it has to do with the possible sexual perpetration of an adult against a child or a youth or anyone, quite frankly, you had better investigate. Very rare is the time, hardly ever, that there is a false accusation. The younger the child, the less likely there's going to be a false accusation. The victims will not come forward easily. So there must be a day of reckoning. There has to be an accounting if we are to help someone understand that God cares. And this is the most crucial of all issues because it is happening all the time, quite frankly. So what God has given to the survivor of very significant things, and it's not just sexual perpetration, but those that have been domestic violence. Again, no one should stay with a batterer, with an abuser. Do not stay. You need to separate. If you're in a church that does not support that, get out of that church. You're in an abusive church. And the pastor is probably doing similar things. So our sensitivities and our activities, our actions as Christians need to be in terms of who has our heart? Where does our heart go out to? It is not the perpetrator. It is not the oppressor. It is to the survivor and the victim. That is where God's heart goes. So God has given imprecatory prayers to help the victim, the survivor, the oppressed, understand how much he cares. So we need to, as Christians, we need to understand the value of these and support them, not tell people, well, I know what that sounds like, but it's really not. No, if you have a problem with an imprecatory prayer, it's because you have a problem. Your affinity and allegiances are inverted. Because this makes you comfortable. It makes you uncomfortable. Why? Because you're not used to God's standard. God's standard is you protect the oppressed. And if you are finding this uncomfortable, it's either because and you're a survivor, it's number one, probably because nobody has protected you. You are worthy of protection if you have been oppressed and you've been a survivor. Jesus was protective. What did he do with the woman that was caught in adultery and they were going to stone her? He stepped in the way. He stepped up. that was one of the primary things that caused his death, among other things. But that was the one thing that the scribes and Pharisees and religious leaders hated. He saved others, but he couldn't save himself. You find any other situation in the New Testament, in the Gospels, where it makes sense when the Pharisees were running their mouth at the foot of the cross. Oh, he saved others, but he couldn't save himself. What do you think they were talking about? Jesus didn't use the term saved, really. He talked about being born again. He talked about the necessity of making sure you enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay, but when the scribes and Pharisees when the religious leaders said he saved others, but he couldn't save himself, I'm convinced they were talking about that moment where he shielded, he stepped in between. He was a protective wall. He was active against the oppressor. He was a peacemaker. And oppressors don't take kindly to that. So imprecatory prayers are so vital to help survivors understand God's heart. They align with God's protective character. And we need to be able to believe his word and believe that he doesn't change. So God has made promises that he will be faithful to his word and he will demonstrate his loving kindness by showing the survivor, the oppressed, that he will act on their behalf, that he will hear their prayers, and that he is still a miracle working God, and that he is the God of heaven's armies who takes note of those being harmed. He will be their strong fortress, and he will let his avenging heart be seen by those being harmed. The last thing you want to do is to minimize the pain of the injured person, of the survivor or the victim, as that sets you in opposition with God's heart. It sets you in opposition with his character and his priorities and his truths and his purposes. His purposes are to set the captives free. And I want to, once again, we're going to play an imprecatory prayer. This is Psalm 37 and part of Psalm 38. We looked at a film, Tears of the Sun. Again, we won't have the background noise, so you don't have to worry if noises affect you. But I want you to now watch and pair the scenes you're going to see with an imprecatory prayer. If you can let this sink in, this is what half the book of Psalms are all about.
Have mercy on me, O God. Have mercy. I look to you for protection. I will hide beneath the shadow of your wings until the danger passes by. I cry out to God Most High, to God who will fulfill his purpose for me. He will send help from heaven to rescue me, disgracing those who hound me. My God will send forth his unfailing love and faithfulness. I am surrounded by fierce lions who greedily devour human prey, whose teeth pierce like spears and arrows, and whose tongues cut like swords. Be exalted, O God, above the highest heavens. May your glory shine over all the earth. My enemies have set a trap for me. I am weary from distress. They have dug a deep pit in my path, but they themselves have fallen into it. My heart is confident in you, O God. My heart is confident. No wonder I can sing your praises. Wake up, my heart. Wake up, O lyre and harp. I will wake the dawn with my song. I will thank you, Lord, among all the people. I will sing your praises among the nations. For your unfailing love is as high as the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the highest heavens. May your glory shine over all the earth. Break the teeth in their mouths, O God. Lord, tear out the fangs of those lions. Let them vanish like water that flows away. When they draw the bow, let their arrows fall short. May they be like a slug that melts away as it moves along, like a stillborn child that never sees the sun. Before your pots can feel the heat of the thorns, whether they be green or dry, the wicked will be swept away. The righteous will be glad when they are avenged, when they dip their feet in the blood of the wicked. Then people will say, surely the righteous still are rewarded. Surely there is a God who judges the earth.
That is an imprecatory prayer. Again, God has given those to those who have been and are being harmed. That is how we will remain stable and fixed, Psalm 91:1, as we remain under the shadow of the Almighty. We will look at how best to support survivors when we return on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insights into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in your healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. It is a one-of-a-kind resource developed by John Euler, a seasoned therapist with over 3 decades of experience working with sexual abuse survivors to help survivors with the process of healing. It can also help you understand the nature of those who harmed you so you can gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with John Euler about your situation or having John conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our weekly program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, so your monthly support or a one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is John Euler. This is Journey to Healing. We're here every Friday evening from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on TECN.TV, the leader in Internet TV. We're picking up where we left off. We're looking at the importance of imprecatory prayers as God's greatest gift to those that are being harmed, to those that are being on the receiving end of injustice by wicked, evil perpetrators and oppressors. On a scale of 1 to 10, as far as negative impact and negatively impacting the course of your life, we're talking about the upper numbers, the 7s, the 8s, the 9s, and the 10s. We're not talking about small stuff. Again, I recommend you go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab to begin looking at this entire series. There's many hours. They're very progressive because far too many people have been told that no matter what, you have to forgive. And that is not true. We forgive as God forgives, and He forgives when there is confession and repentance. Just shy of that, there is no forgiveness. Why? Because it demonstrates that the person is not sorry. The question is, where does your heart go when you hear that somebody has been harmed? Is it in this sense? Are you inclined almost in knee-jerk fashion to tell the injured party that they need to get over it, they need to, quote unquote, forgive? Or does your heart go out to the survivor or the oppressed? And does your energy go to the hurtful perpetrator oppressor and tell them they need to make things right? Where's your first knee-jerk reaction? We need to have God's heart when it comes to the oppressed. We need to understand how He feels, because if we get it wrong, then we do what? We give the wrong impression to those who are injured. We give the wrong impression about God's heart. And it is a serious thing, because if you double down on this, if you start to make it your mission and your project to focus on the injured party rather than the injurious party, then you find yourself in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 5 through 13. Let me read that to you. So for any of you out there in churches that are inclined to let the perp off the hook and place responsibility on the injured party, you need to listen to this. Starting in verse 5, it says this. Paul writes, "You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of God." Kingdom of Christ and of God. So if somebody's perping on somebody, are they immoral? Yep. Are they impure? Yep. Are they greedy? That's idolatry anyway. So that's okay. So if someone is perpetrating on someone, they're not a Christian. They're just not. Sorry. If you have an issue with that, then you have a real issue. Okay. God's heart will stop them. Now, is that different? What about David? David, yes, fell into sin, but that was not his character. That was not his disposition. Those are two different things. You need to understand the difference between a prodigal, someone that is taken in a fault, someone that was ensnared in sin. someone who accidentally or not accidentally allowed themselves to go downhill versus someone who is a perpetrator or predator because they have become willful and they have become a fool and now they have become predatory. If you can't distinguish and define the difference between a prodigal, someone taken in a fault, versus a perpetrator and a predator, then you haven't got clue one how God feels towards this. Then you can't discern the difference between someone who's persecuting versus someone who's oppressing. And sexual perpetration has nothing to do with persecution. Okay, Paul continues. So he's again, verse 5. You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of Christ and of God. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins. Who's he talking about? He's not talking about the perp. Paul already just addressed that in verse 5. The perp ain't going to heaven. Now who's he talking about? The person inclined to excuse it away. So Paul's talking to the church saying, number one, the perp's not going to heaven. He's unsafe. Get him out of the church, in essence. Verse 6, don't be fooled by those who'll try to excuse those sins. For the anger of God will fall on all who disobey him. So if you are naturally inclined to excuse away perpetrators, God's anger is going to fall on you. You need to understand how serious this is. Don't participate in these. Don't participate in the things these people do. For once you were full of darkness. So if you're excusing perpetrators, then a case can be made. You got darkness inside you, but now you have light from the Lord. So live as people of light. For this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. Carefully examine or determine what pleases the Lord. And so I'm telling you, I'm so bold right now to tell you what pleases the Lord. It is when you align yourself and you protect those that have been harmed, the captives we are to set free. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. We could also say, don't you dare provide cover for those. Okay, instead, expose them. It is shameful even to talk about the things that ungodly people do in secret, but their evil intentions, let alone their deeds, but their evil intentions will be exposed. When the light shines on them, do not cover over a perpetrator's actions and sins, or you become an enabler and God's judgment will fall on you. Your efforts need to be directed at the perp, at the oppressor. If you have a domestic violence situation going on in your church, why aren't you kicking the guy out? And women can also be oppressive. You can have Mother Gothels. You can have Rapunzel's mother, Mother Gothel. How about Cinderella's stepmother? You got plenty of Cinderella's stepmothers sitting in churches that think they're queen bees, and meanwhile, they are terrorizing and traumatizing their kids and their husband. So this goes both ways, okay? So the importance of delivering the right message and the right to the oppressed, to those that have been harmed. So we need to let the oppressed understand God's heart. His heart is for them. He is protective. That's why he's given imprecatory prayers. So again, what is an imprecatory prayer? It's a prayer that aligns with God's protective character. It's a prayer that believes God. It believes he doesn't change. It's a prayer that believes God is as intensely involved and interested in what happens to me or others as he says. He says, no sparrow falls without his awareness or notice. God has made promises, and he will be faithful to his word and will demonstrate his loving kindness to me by showing me that he will act upon and on my behalf, and that he will answer prayers. That is his faithfulness and his loving kindness. He'll answer my prayers of trust, that he is still a miracle-working God, and that he is still the God of heaven's armies who takes note of those who harm others. And he will be their strong fortress, and he will let them see his avenging heart. The last thing you want to do is to minimize the pain of an injured person, of the injured party, the survivor or the victim. as that sets you in opposition with God's heart, his character, his priorities, his truths, and his purpose. He is a protective God. And if you don't understand that, then either your head has been in the sand, or you don't have God's heart, or there's something that's causing you to protect that which God doesn't want protected, which is the oppressor, and he wants you to protect the oppressed. We must understand that those that have deeply harmed someone are under God's judgment, and those that have been deeply harmed have nothing but grace. And we need to let them know that we support them and we believe them, and that it will be the perpetrator who will pay the price. The state of Pennsylvania, the then Attorney General, he's actually the governor now, he oversaw the investigation into the Catholic Church. All churches have this issue, but the Catholic Church, being such a highly structured entity, is uniquely rife with perpetrators and predators. I have it on inside information. John Gallagher, a priest of 25 years, blew the whistle on child abuse, and the perpetrator did jail time, but he was run out of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, the hierarchy, is dark, and they are deviant. And they have let the oppressed, they have let the survivors swing in the breeze. They've told them to shut their mouths, and they have not acted with God's heart. It is an apostate organization. The Attorney General led in that state the investigation, and when the report was being revealed, they started with this video, which helps us understand the impact of sexual abuse. And in this case, it was at the hands of priests.
My name is Robert Corby, and I'm 83 years old.
Sean Doherty, 48 years old.
Carolyn Fortney, 37.
I grew up in a small western Pennsylvania town, Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
I grew up in Bethlehem.
Anhot, which is like right behind Steel High School, Steelton area.
I was groomed starting young.
The day I met him, I was around 18 months old.
They targeted me because I was fatherless.
In my diaper, and I ran out and ran right to him.
We were taught, I mean, the priests and the nuns are God.
Just think, like, the word God makes me think of him, and I just...
You're being groomed to get used to a grown man's hands, on you regularly.
So he would always have his hands on me.
When you have the priest touching you every day, that's a hard memory to have. The first thought of an erection that you have in your life is by the hands of the priest.
All of a sudden, he was gone.
Father Karchik in my 8th grade year was just up and moved with no notice, no anything. The town was devastated. Everybody loved him.
Well, they haven't found out yet.
He abused it, and the church covered it up.
Who would have believed me? A priest in 1948 or 47 would abuse you? Do that? Never heard of such a thing because they covered it.
It doesn't ever go away. It has an effect on you for the rest of your life.
And I'm a survivor.
It's not a vendetta against the church. We're called survivors for a reason.
These are people that these priests ruined their lives, and they still, at 83 years old, still affects them.
I feel like my whole life has been a lie.
Has absolutely destroyed me.
My children suffered. Why suffered?
My dad found out, but He went crazy.
I was very unaffectionate. I couldn't show any affection with my wife.
I had no desire to have children. None, because of this.
My children I couldn't hold or hug.
I didn't feel comfortable. I still don't feel comfortable now in relationships.
No kids for me.
The affection I could give to her. And thanks to Father Royer, he took that away from me.
I mean, it's affected my life so much.
This is a lifelong issue with survivors.
They have to be accountable, the church, for what they did.
I've waited for a long time for this.
I think this report's gonna help people who don't have a family, because they're gonna know that there's a lot of people out there now that believe them and are behind them.
This is one of the proudest things I've ever done in my life.
I'm so happy.
Speaking about your abuse is a very important step in the healing process.
I just was always saying, they're not going to beat me.
It'll just be refreshing to not have to, I guess, pretend like I'm someone else all the time. It's very lonely. Especially when it's your word against God's.
If you are a part of a church, you have survivors in your midst. The question is, do you know them? And the question is, why not? If you're a church leader, why haven't the survivors in your church come forward? You need to create an environment that is survivor supportive. If you want to know how to do that, you go to SurvivorSupport.net and begin reviewing every tab. You need to educate yourself. You need to educate yourself on who has God's heart. It is the survivor, it is not the perpetrator. We need to be about the business of healing those that have been wounded. Our affinity and loyalties and allegiances need to be where God's are, and God is for the survivor. The distortion, the amount of imprisonment, as it were, that survivors have had to go through is unbelievable. And we need to set captives free. So to have a false or fraudulent or a inverted, distorted view of what forgiveness is, and to tell a survivor that they need to forgive an unrepentant predator is diabolical, because God has them under judgment. He has the perp under judgment. This is so ubiquitous in churches that automatically people, survivors naturally think they have to forgive. Why do they think that? Because they've been told that. They haven't been told the miraculous miracle of imprecatory prayers, and that they don't have to forgive because all the onus is on the perp to confess. Once confession takes place, yes. But how many perps do you think ever confess? I've worked with them for 15 years. How many do you think ever confess? They take plea deals. They don't confess. So do not add another millstone around the neck of a survivor. If you are a church leader or part of a church, you take the millstone and you put it around the perp's neck, meaning you let them know they're under God's judgment. That's how you are a peacemaker, literally. We need to see and we need to understand the impact of perpetration, all sorts of kinds of perpetration, but especially sexual perpetration. And we're going to now watch a video of the Fortney girls. We just saw one of the 5 sisters that were perpetrated upon. And I want you to watch in this interview in Good Morning America how they naturally think they're supposed to forgive. Watch how quickly it comes out and look at the level of false guilt that they have been under because they've been taught a diabolical theology of cheap forgiveness.
My name is Robert Corby.
Okay, wrong one. Hold on here. We'll find it. I'm sorry. And here we go.
New York, New Jersey, and New Mexico announced new investigations today into the handling of sex abuse allegations in the Catholic Church. Missouri recently announced a similar investigation. This follows a report last month by a Pennsylvania grand jury alleging decades of abuse of more than 1,000 children by more than 300 priests. In one case, 5 sisters were abused by the same priest. Tonight in Eye on America, 4 of those sisters share their stories with Nikki Batiste.
How old were you when alleged abuse began?
13.
I was 10 when
I was in the first grade.
I was under 2 years old. I didn't realize it until I was 12. I was watching a movie of a priest molesting altar boys. That's the day that I put it together. I never knew what the word molest meant.
These are the Fortney sisters. Patty, Laura, Teresa, Carolyn, and one other were sexually abused by their pastor in Enhow, Pennsylvania, beginning in the early 1980s.
He was a very sick man.
Father Augustine Gella was a trusted family, a grandfatherly figure, a regular at meals where he often said grace.
He would give us candy, he would take us out, and just constantly giving. Gave us stuff, bought us clothes, bought us toys, anything we wanted.
The Fortneys believe Gella was grooming the girls. 13-year-old Patty was molested as her little sisters looked on.
He was constantly hugging me in front of them, kissing me in front of them, trying to put his tongue in your mouth. He needed to know my cup size. I would continually remind myself, he's my priest. He's the mediator between God and man. This is okay.
I mean, even at our kitchen table, things happen in front of my parents' face that they couldn't see.
This family went through hell, their lives ravaged by their trusted family priest, who betrayed them in the most depraved way imaginable, stealing the innocence of 5 of their beloved daughters, all while masquerading as a man of God. It was early 1980 when Father Gus Gella suddenly packed up and left his parish in New Jersey. He headed to a new church in Pennsylvania. The Fortney family warmly welcomed the new priest into their home. He came for dinners, gave the kids gifts, asked the children to come to the rectory and help them count the Sunday collection. The sisters say he began to groom them under the guise of what he called education. The family says the abuse began to happen in the rectory, in their home, on family trips, virtually everywhere they went together. For Patty, it started when she was 13, continued until she was 15. Laura was 10 years old, and it went on until she was 14. Teresa was just 8. She went through this for 4 long years. Marissa was only 7, and it stopped when she turned 10. Carolyn was just a toddler. She was 2 years old. He didn't stop until she was 12, and only then, because that's when his story blew up in his face. While we do not know the full extent of what they suffered, a recent grand jury report says he admitted to fondling the girls. Investigators then found he had regularly collected samples of their urine, pubic hair, and blood. Tragically, the grand jury also discovered, now in an all-too-familiar tale, that the church knew about Gus Gella.
You know, when you hear that, Carolyn, it's so hard to identify sort of which the worst betrayal is, because the cover-up is almost just as bad, perhaps, as the actual.
You know, I often say, I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone. How do people even think this is okay?
Teresa, when did you all start to realize that he was doing this to all of you?
It wasn't until the grand jury investigation. Yes, it was known that Carolyn was abused, and then I came out shortly after that. But as far as these two, it's just been a short 2.5 years.
I didn't realize. I was in a counseling session with my husband and my pastor and his wife. And I was sharing with him what the priest would do to me. And my pastor literally leaned forward and he said, "Patty, do you realize you were sexually abused?"
He worked his way through the family, Laura.
Yeah. For me, I'm still discovering things. It was about 2.5 years ago when Carolyn came to Patty and I and said, we need to break the silence. And she didn't know of our abuse at that point. And then Patty would call me and say, Laura, do you remember when he would do this? And I'd say, I didn't, but now I do. I do remember that.
You know, Ed, I'm sure, obviously, for a father, it's so devastating.
I believed what happened to my Carolyn right away when I was told about it, and because the way she was crying and acting and everything, it was just had to be true, because no one would act like that or lie to their father in that manner. So I knew it had to be true. I couldn't work for 2 years after that happened, and that really put us in a hole.
Talk to me about the after impact, as you go through life, how you deal with it as a family, and what did it take away from you that you're trying to get back?
I would have people say to me, how many sisters and brothers do you have? I'd say I have 7 sisters and a brother. I'm the youngest of 9, but I kind of have always felt like an only child because, we really are just now starting to get to know each other.
I moved away. Yeah. I constantly was moving away. I wanted to suppress it. I did suppress it. And I'm just so thankful that I do have my family back. And I'm not ashamed anymore.
I'd like to add that it impacted our children too. Because of this, we lost a lot of trust in people in society, especially leaders, coaches. We didn't know who to trust.
I have to interrupt at this point, given time constraints. We will continue to look at the impact of sexual abuse and significant perpetration that's happening in churches. We need to support survivors. Our affections and affinities need to go to them and never to perpetrators. And God's heart is for the survivor, and that is what we need to reflect. And we will continue looking at the damage of perpetration and how we can help them on the next edition of Journey to Healing.
You've been listening to Journey to Healing, sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. We trust you've been helped by the information our host, John Euler, has shared. To donate to this ministry, to schedule a personal consultation with John, or to arrange a professional training for your church or organization with John, simply visit our website. On behalf of Survivor Support, we look forward to hearing from you and to have you join us next time on Journey to Healing.